I still remember the exact moment the music dropped out of my ears, even though it was still pounding through the walls of the house. It was the moment I realized how quiet guilt can be, how it doesn't scream or cry, it just sits in your chest and waits. Somewhere across town, my husband was tucking our kids into bed, smoothing their hair, kissing their foreheads, telling them mommy would be home soon. And I was standing in a stranger's hallway, holding a plastic cup I hadn't finished, wishing I could rewind time to the second before I said yes to the party at all. If you've ever made one decision that split your life into before and after, you'll understand why I stayed silent for so long, and why I'm telling you this now. I hadn't planned to stay late. I hadn't planned to drink more than one glass of wine. I hadn't planned to laugh as much as I did, or to feel seen in a way I hadn't felt in years. Work had been exhausting, the kind of exhausting that drains not just your body but your sense of who you are. At home, life was beautiful but predictable: homework, dinner, bedtime stories, laundry folding itself into the same quiet patterns every night. At the office, I was competent, reliable, invisible. Until that night. The party was supposed to be harmless. A promotion celebration, a rented house, loud music, coworkers letting off steam. My husband had smiled when I told him, joking that I deserved a break. He didn't know how starved I felt for adult conversation that didn't revolve around bills or school schedules. He didn't know how heavy the word, Mom, had become, even though I loved it. And I didn't know how dangerous it can be to want something you can't quite name. They were both there when I arrived. Mark and Ethan. We'd worked together for years, shared deadlines, jokes, complaints about management. They knew my coffee order, my strengths, my stress points. They noticed when I cut my hair. That night, they noticed everything. The way they laughed at my stories, the way they leaned in when I spoke, the way they made me feel like I wasn't fading into the background of my own life. I should have left when the music got louder and the lights dimmer. I should have left when the wine tasted too easy going down. But I stayed, telling myself I was just being friendly, just enjoying a rare moment of freedom. I texted my husband that I'd be late, added a heart emoji, and didn't think about how that heart would feel like a wait later. At some point, the party fractured into smaller rooms, smaller conversations. Someone suggested going upstairs where it was quieter. I remember hesitating, a tiny voice whispering that this was the line. I remember ignoring it. That's the part that still hurts the most. Upstairs, the laughter softened. The walls felt closer. Compliments turned personal. Hands brushed against mine and didn't move away. I told myself I could handle it, that I was in control, that nothing would happen unless I wanted it to. But control is a fragile thing when you're tired and flattered and lonely in ways you don't admit to yourself. What happened next didn't feel like a single choice. It felt like a series of small surrenders. A door closing, a laugh that went on too long. A moment where I froze instead of speaking. I won't describe it in detail, because the details aren't the point. The point is that when it was over, I didn't feel powerful or desired. I felt hollow. I felt like I had stepped outside my body and left something important behind. I drove home in silence, hands shaking on the steering wheel. My phone buzzed with a picture my husband sent, our kids asleep, tangled in blankets, peaceful. I pulled over and cried until my chest hurt, because I knew that no matter what I told myself, something had broken. Not just trust, but the version of myself I thought I was. For days, I lived in two worlds. In one, nothing had changed. I made breakfast, packed lunches, answered emails. In the other, everything was different. Mark and Ethan avoided my eyes at work. Or sometimes they didn't, and that was worse. Every glance felt like a reminder of my silence, my complicity, my confusion. I didn't know what I was more afraid of, being exposed or being forgotten. The guilt started to seep into everything. I snapped at my husband over nothing. I watched my kids play and wondered how someone who loved them so fiercely could make such a reckless choice. I told myself I would take it to the grave, that confession would only cause pain. But secrets don't stay quiet. They grow. The breaking point came on an ordinary Tuesday. My daughter asked why I looked sad all the time. My husband reached for my hand that night, and I flinched. He noticed. Of course he did. He always notices. That's when I realized the lie was already hurting them, even if they didn't know why. Telling him was the hardest thing I've ever done. I didn't dress it up. I didn't excuse myself. I told him I went to a party, that I crossed a line, that 2 coworkers were involved, and that I didn't fully understand how it happened, only that it did. I watched his face change, watched shock turn into pain so deep it scared me. He didn't yell. That almost made it worse. We sat on opposite ends of the couch, the space between us filled with everything I had taken for granted. He asked questions. I answered them, sometimes through tears, sometimes through numbness. He asked why. I told him the truth, that I felt invisible, that I wanted to feel like more than the roles I lived in, that I made a terrible decision instead of asking for help. He left that night, not forever, but long enough for the house to feel like a stranger. I didn't sleep. I replayed every moment, wishing I had chosen differently. Wishing love was enough to erase damage. It isn't, but it can be enough to try. The weeks that followed were brutal and honest. Therapy, long conversations, silence, anger. He struggled with the idea that while he was being the father and husband he promised to be, I was breaking vows we both believed in. I struggled with forgiving myself enough to keep going. There were days he thought about leaving. There were days I thought I deserved it. At work, I requested a transfer. Not because anyone forced me to, but because healing required distance. I set boundaries I should have set long ago. I learned how important it is to say no early, loudly, without apology. I learned that being wanted is not the same as being valued. What surprised me most was that healing didn't come from pretending it never happened. It came from facing it fully. From listening to my husband's pain without defending myself. From allowing him to be angry. From choosing, every day, to be present instead of hiding in shame. We're not a perfect story with a neat ending. Trust, once cracked, takes time to rebuild. But we're still here. We're still choosing each other. My husband still tucks our kids in at night. Sometimes I stand in the doorway and watch, overwhelmed by how close I came to losing this life. If you're listening to this and you're standing at the edge of a decision, thinking it's just one night, just a moment, I want you to pause. Ask yourself what you're really hungry for. Ask for it honestly. Don't trade something sacred for something temporary. And if you've already crossed a line you can't uncross, know this, running from the truth will only make the distance greater. Facing it is terrifying, but it's also the only way back to yourself. I learned that the hard way, on a night when music was loud. Guilt was quiet, and love was waiting at home, trusting me to come back unchanged.